Well, this is the first episode of the No Grift Zone.
Yeah, dude.
Jonny, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet me. Are we meeting for the first time, Royal?
We're going to pretend like we are.
Okay.
Jonny, if you could give a short intro to what the point of this podcast is, that would be great.
Yeah. So there's I think we're both coming to it with different things. I guess the idea is to talk about difficult or sometimes controversial or complicated topics that are a regular part of everyday life for all of us. And in any conversation, it seems like in modern American life, they're highly politicized and full of grift. You know, that's one of the problems that we see. It's why we are skeptical of all these other podcasts and forms of media and stuff like that. So the idea is, how do you get rid of all that and find a way to have two people have a good, high quality conversation and get closer to the truth?
How would you define grift?
I define grift as basically any kind of content where someone is chasing after money and audience capture rather than the truth and the best possible conversation they could have. Right? It's where their goals are kind of like misaligned. That's how I kind of frame it. I'm curious how you define it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a purpose for grift. I think like my definition of grift would be taking advantage of someone's emotions by using an argument that's not logically sound, but the person that they're delivering it to is willing to believe it because of that person's emotional state.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the purpose would be to obviously take advantage of that to where you profit or benefit in some way from, whether that's socially, financially, or in any other space.
So obvious in the spirit of that, we don't have a sponsor yet, but I figured we would get Big Maple Syrup to sponsor the show. Obviously the perfect miracle cure given to us by God to heal all ailments. What do you think?
Honestly, getting a recognition from Big Maple Syrup would be...
That'd be huge.
I'd be honored. Yeah.
I mean, I've personally been drinking a gallon of it every day, and that's why I am now protected from Jewish space lasers, so...
Is there something about maple syrup that I'm missing the context on?
No, it's just you know how like people with those at home remedies, it's always something like super generic that's natural. They're like
onions and honey.
Yeah. Did you have eczema? Just rub a little honey on your thighs. Now you're good.
Dude, put the onions at the bottom of your feet and cover your socks with Vaseline. I swear to God, Grandma said it worked. They cured the Spanish flu with this.
No more Spanish flu, yeah. So Big Maple Syrup, thanks in advance for sponsoring the No Grift Zone.
You ever see those ads when you're like on any website ever and it's like, do this one thing, and it's like the weirdest picture of the most grotesque like food item attached to someone's eyes or their toes or whatever.
Obviously, like that clickbait works for some people, right? Are people just attracted to like really gross stuff or what? I don't know.
And ever since I was like 10 years old, at the beginning when I was on the internet, I looked at that stuff and I just knew, I knew there was some sort of grift, I guess, to those ads.
Yeah.
And I knew they weren't real. I knew it was fake in some way. But, still 14 years later, I'm still seeing those ads.
They're still everywhere.
So somehow they're profiting and they're making money. And I just wonder, are they taking advantage of the 50-year-olds back then that were clicking on them and they're now 64 and still clicking on them? Like what's going on? Who's clicking on these ads?
Imagine getting duped for 15 straight years by the same BS. What a loser.
Oh my gosh. Funny you say that because that segues us into our exact topic today. So the topic that we decided upon was, is it clear that there is a God? If not, what is the meaning of life?
Yeah.
I will let you take the first blows at this, Jonny.
Well, I suppose it's probably fair to share a bit of my background on this.
Okay.
And I think to start there, I grew up in an evangelical Christian. My parents were both involved in ministry and pastors. I built my entire life around the existence of a God. I was that person who was in church 3 to 4 days a week. Every single event, every single thing that I did was about church, and I was also that annoying kid at your public school who was like, "You should really come to church." Little evangelist Johnny.
Oh my gosh, you
Yeah.
reminded me of myself at one time.
Oh, it was a good time. Don't get me wrong. As a kid, it provided a lot of things I have a lot of fond memories of the social situations and everything, but into my teenage years, there were so many specific things that my parents believed and instilled in me that I started to question, especially in high school. Like the first time I read a really nice gay dude, it was like, this doesn't add up with what you've told me about gay people. Right. And my parents were specifically bigoted towards gay people. Very, that they were all going to be horrible to me or sexually assault me in a corner or something. Yeah. Like that was like the impression that like you would get. So,
Okay.
over time, I think with the influence of pop culture and some music and some things, I started to have my own personal doubts. Fast forward into my mid-20s, I think it was the first time I admitted out loud that I was agnostic, and I had lost my faith completely. I was no longer in pretty good standing with anyone from the church or my parents. And like a lot of people don't understand what that undertaking is like if you've never gone through it, but you're kind of losing an entire social structure. You're losing an entire social system. But it really was intellectual. I was reading a lot of books and educating myself. And the more I got educated, the less a lot of things about the picture of the universe where I thought God created it made sense to me. And then I went on a multi-year kick of watching every single atheism versus creationism kind of debate on YouTube that I possibly could.
Gosh.
I read all the
cringe
books,
arc.
all the books on the topic, and there are a lot of them. I mean, I read them all. Probably not, but I read a lot of them. The one that really probably blew my mind the most was Jesus Interrupted. You ever heard of that?
I have not. Who's it by?
So Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman has 3 different degrees in biblical studies. He started at Moody Bible Institute, then he went to Wheaton College, and then he went to Princeton Seminary and got his PhD. So the dude knows the Bible.
Is he non-secular?
He originally was. And then finally, into his like 3rd year of his PhD program at Princeton, he also started to admit he was agnostic.
Interesting.
The point of Jesus Interrupted is it basically just points out the contradictions between the gospel stories. So rather than focusing on the Bible as a whole, it's just specifically just the gospels, right? Because Jesus is the most important story of Christianity. Take a look at it. And is there inconsistency there? Now, for me, that didn't get me all the way to I think there's no God. That just meant the way Christianity is doing things is clearly not something I believe anymore. It kind of like took that apart from me, but I think I still believed in a generic deistic God, which we can get into what that means. I still believe there was a creator, right?
Okay.
So, and then it was probably about a year or 2 later where I think I accepted the fact and started calling myself an agnostic atheist. And ultimately that I just believed that, I didn't have any good reason to believe in a creator God. So that's kind of my overall story arc of how I got here. Cards on the table.
Interesting. I think there are a lot of people that relate to what you said about you grew up in a very religious household that had very bigoted views to anything that wasn't in that religion's good side, really.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes things that had no reason, by the way.
Say that again.
And sometimes things that had like nothing to do with it, but it infects every part. Like somehow Pokemon was a work of the devil. You'll never be able to explain that logically, but that's the level. It just starts to infect all part of your culture and day-to-day life.
I see. So in my opinion, though, I would say that that's not the norm for most religious people in America.
Yep.
However, we do happen to hear stories like that more often than we hear stories of what is actually the norm. Because, and the reason why is that's that in a way is the more interesting story to listen to on the Snapchat advertisement is, I grew up in a mega religious household. I couldn't even read books. I wasn't let outside until I was 22 or something like that weird, and it's like what's hard is to relate to the masses with that story. That's just like a shock story rather than it is an actual relatable and, you know, common story. I think what might be more common to the most people in America that have some sort of religious background is they go to church. They have gone to church at some point in their lives, maybe regularly at one point, and have stopped. Their family generally believes in it. They'd be kind of viewed as an outsider if they told their family there is no God, or I should say there is Yahweh, the God of the Bible, is not real. But most of the families aren't like super against like, you know, gay people, or they don't have any super bigoted views. They're just they just don't agree with it, and they're not really like, I hate these people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I need to keep my children away from them.
Right.
That's kind of how I describe my family. Excuse me. They were religious in the sense of that's what they believed in, but they didn't go to church. They weren't super involved in like, you know, church stuff. They didn't like teach it every day at home, and they didn't like read from the Bible all the time, or rarely ever at home. But it was something that was like just understood to be real to them. And they never had any, you know, bigoted views that they really pushed. So that's kind of how I grew up. And then around like 17 years old, I started like really getting into it just on my own accord. You know, and I got into what I could be wrong here. This could be just my experience, but I believe this is the main line stream of Christianity in America today, is one that isn't like saying this is their belief. We don't hate gay people. We think that, you know, they're just as good people as we are. We believe like the things they actively choose to participate in are sin. We don't believe that it's sin that they experience it. We believe in more of it's sin that they choose to act upon it. And we just see them as someone who is, you know, struggles with a different type of sin than I do. You know, I could struggle with anger, and that's just as bad of a sin as someone who struggles with an attraction to the same sex. And that's really how they see it, and that's how it was always preached, you know, at my church. But I could be wrong. You know, I could be totally wrong that that's not how it is. But after like, from my experience of being in pretty deep into that for 4 years, I'm pretty sure that's where most of Christians today are at, with maybe 10 or 20% of them in the more like really hardcore category of like, you know, we cannot have our children around these people.
Yeah. I think there's a degree, in my experience, and I've spent a lot of time, you know, especially given the walk I've come from, you know, when we first moved across the country, you know, we started on the East Coast, moved to Iowa, the heart of the country. It was weird because we actually went from like a more extreme church when I was growing up as a teenager to a much more generic Midwest kind of, you know, kind of like you talked about. And so I think there's a degree. You have nominal Christians on one side who are, I believe in God. It's not a huge part of my life. I don't really go to church all that often. I just think that, you know, big man upstairs is looking out for me. And I'm trying to live a good life. I think, you know, most of the generic, you know, they really like love your neighbor as yourself. They really like, you know, some of those basic moral intuitions that come from their faith. And they've never thought about it that hard. So what's funny from my standpoint, to your point, I know I haven't had a typical experience. You know, I've had enough conversations to know that. There's a rubber band effect. When your entire world is religion, that rubber band is pulled all the way back. And so when it starts to snap back in the other direction, rather than you just casually falling out of church, it's like, wow, my whole life was based around this thing. And so it's either everything or nothing. And I think that for me, that meant I explored some of these ideas, like, you know, the general proofs for God arguments, those kinds of things. Like, I went full into the philosophy because it either was everything or it was nothing. You know, and a lot of people don't have that experience because it was never everything for them.
As in, like, you did a whole 180 to when religion snapped, you went the complete other way.
Yeah,
what you're saying?
I just it had to be my primary focus of my education, my thinking, my day-to-day life, because it was like either everything up until this point has been pointless, or I have done something horrible or missed something really important and fallen out of favor with God. That's a really scary proposition to think. When you face that, as kind of an emotional void there that, a lot of people who tell my story, I don't think sometimes, don't really hit that point hard enough. Like, the emotional despair of the idea of losing your faith is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. If you're the kind of person who based everything on it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like, to me, I had the feeling of, if God is real, then we need to like center our entire life around it. Like it didn't make logical sense to not center your entire life around what God would want and what God is about if
Right.
he's real. Like, to
Right.
me, that's logically does not make sense. But if he's not real, then there you go. Something that I wonder if you felt this too, but something that I experienced when I lost my faith was I felt like, okay, before I lost my faith, I had the view of, okay, God is kind of guiding me through life and, wants me to do well in a way of where I get closer to him and I do things that help him or further his cause. And now I've lost my faith, I feel like, am I going to lose out of favor with God and be punished? Where is my life going to go now? Even though I'm simultaneously like losing my faith because I don't think God is real, I still kind of like felt that way of like, man, my life is going to go terrible now,
Mine was more intensely the fear of hell. I mean, I like, if I'm wrong,
Oh, yeah,
hell is
that's
real.
too.
Hell is real, and I am screwed, man. Like, I have put myself in the worst possible predicament, and so I had to be sure. Like, I had to be as sure as I could be, and I had to figure it
Yeah.
out.
It's Pascal's wager to the infinity,
Yeah.
That's so funny. You want to know the two things that I thought of that talked me out of my religion?
Sure.
So it's not really like the historical inaccuracies, or possibly you could even call it the archaeological inaccuracies, or any of that, scientific, whatever. It's the fact that those inaccuracies either exist or could exist from the things that we know. And I'm like, okay, if it's hard to, there's two exact reasons for it. It's going to be hard for me to put into words because I have to rethink about it every time.
Yeah.
Man, I'm going to return to this. Because I can't
actually
spit it out in a way that communicates well.
Well, I have a great analogy that I use because when I've talked about it, a lot of people, regardless of how stretched out their rubber band was, to use my earlier example, I think a lot of people experience it this way. So I think our outlook on the world, our worldview, is kind of contained in a neat structure.
Mm-hmm.
So by analogy, I think my favorite way to explain this is it's kind of like a Jenga tower. You know Jenga, the game with the blocks, okay? Each one of those little bricks in your Jenga tower represent one small belief. It could be faith is a virtue. It could be the earth is only 6,000 years old. It could be, Noah's flood was real and happened, and he put, animals 2 by 2 on an ark. It could be simple things that God is love. And it could also be all the other things that shape your worldview. Things you know about science, things you know about health, things you know about, your social situations, whatever. And so you have this giant Jenga tower. And then over time, you pull out as contradictions arise, and you have cognitive dissonance, which is that uncomfortable feeling when, you have two contradictory beliefs. You get that feeling of cognitive dissonance. It's painful, and you try to resolve it. And sometimes the way to resolve it is to just completely take that brick out. All right, this one's no good. I'm actually going to replace it with a different brick. And we put that brick up on top of the Jenga tower. But over time, that base that we grew up with our childhood gets hollowed out, and eventually for the person who loses their faith, it's like it all collapses.
Yeah, that one thing that's like supporting the entire belief at the bottom finally gets chalked out at 22, and now your whole tower collapses.
Yeah. So you were kind of going down this road, but for me, that big one was the concept that faith is a virtue. And I actually I used to think it was just good to have faith, and I had like that blind optimism that a lot of people who are, faithful people have. And I commend it. It can actually power you to do a lot of things. But Sam Harris's arguments against the concept of faith, really stuck with me forever. The one I use, it's a slightly different version than his. Like, everyone can be full of faith until the plane starts to go down. And then the second the plane starts to go, somebody's like, God's going to teach me how to fly this. Just have a little faith in me. You're like, yeah, I'd rather you not touch the flight stick, actually. Could you step back away? I'm not just cool with that. Now, if you have somebody who's equally pious and faithful as you, maybe they'd be okay with that. But it's a funny example to think of what it would be if two equally faithful people both think that God's going to teach them how to fly the plane. How are you going to resolve that dispute?
Fighting over the joystick?
Yeah. Everyone dies because we couldn't figure out who the right prophet of God was.
I'm going to read this real quick, and we can make a quick edit out of this. Okay. Okay. I have a working understanding of this now. Okay. So now we're going to cut back. And so back to those 2 points that I said that kind of brought me away from my faith. I started reading the book by Christopher Hitchens, God is Not Great, Why Religion Poisons Everything.
What
it's
a gem
like,
of a book.
I know, right? The cringiest title ever. I felt embarrassed reading it in public. But it's bright yellow too, so like everyone's looking at it. But I come across info in there that makes me doubt my faith. Okay, fair. Now, who knows if the info in there is true or not? It appears to be true, and to our regular logic, it looks really true. And it points to that, God of the Bible probably isn't real. So, in me, using the faculties I have of my mind, my understanding, I'm coming to the conclusion that, okay, these seem to be way more true than the possibility that God of the Bible is real. So we have to ask ourselves, how did this information, if God is real, how did this information come to be in this Christopher Hitchens book? Well, it either came from people truly seeking the truth, not without malicious intent, trying to bring truth up, and they're showing this evidence that God isn't real, or they came to this Christopher Hitchens book with malicious intent to deceive, a deceptive intent. Okay, regardless if it was malicious intent or not, the information they provide is really compelling. So that leaves two possibilities. I can lose my faith because of the logic that I have from someone. Let's assume God is real. I could lose my faith in the very real God of the Bible by just looking at information someone has created with honest intent. And that bothers me. Like you're telling me with the faculties that God has given me, I can lose faith in him just from a clerical error? Like, come on. Okay, but then this leads to the possibility too. Let's say it was deceptive intent. I can lose my faith in God due to someone else deceiving me, like lying to me. And so now it comes down, an argument could be put to saying, well, you have to like really scrutinize the stuff you're looking at. Yeah, you really have to. But even if I put my entire life of becoming a biblical scholar and learn this stuff to the T, I may never come to a good enough like understanding of it to actually decide whether this is true or not. And because of that, it's not my fault to lose my faith, and then and then to get eternal punishment on top of that is it just points to me that Occam's razor says this is most likely the God of the Bible is not real because of this. I don't think the God of the Bible would do that, even with the most like liberal interpretation of the God of the Bible. You know what I mean? That doesn't make sense. There's no, and people could say, well, your wisdom is not as good as God's wisdom. But you understand, he gave me the wisdom that I have to discern these things, and now he's going to damn me for it. This is not sounding to be true. My second point with this that bothered me is I realize this, but I could be wrong, so I want to talk to some of my friends about it. But this doubles up on that fact now. Now I could be leading my friends down that same path. So just from me talking about my worries and trying to work through my struggles with my faith, I could damn my friends to hell for eternity, because this information could shake their faith to their core. So now I can't talk about it because they might be led to damnation because of the information I brought them. And I'm like, okay, both of these facts together just point to that God probably isn't real.
Interesting. Yeah. So both of them for you come down to, I think we actually came down on the same problem.
Regardless of whether the science says God isn't real or not, the fact that the science pretty much points to that, it could be wrong. The science could be wrong, but the fact that it really points to it, and our faculties tell us that it does point to that, and that can damn us to hell, that's the problem.
Yep. And then you start thinking about, what about people through no fault of their own who were born in a region that just never got the revelation? Then you start thinking about,
Dude, come on. You know there's one vague verse from Paul that talks about that in Romans, bro. Come on.
Yeah. And I mean, for a lot of Christians, that works. It's a good argument. So I see a lot of people, again, I've watched every...
You know Paul said that God appears to people in a way that only they could understand, to everyone ever on earth. He says it somewhere vaguely in Romans, dude. Argument settled. Yeah. That's not real, dude. The gospel gets everybody. Everybody gets their chance. Come on.
Everybody does indeed, yeah.
Oh, God.
What my version of this was, honestly, from a point of kind of like intellectual... It was on the same level as what you said, but basically it was like, at some point I came to the conclusion that if God was real, that should be something that a person of my intellect should be able to come up with really good reasons for.
Yeah,
in a way that
should be very apparent.
In a way that just cuts through everything, because I couldn't
with such dire consequences.
Right.
If you don't.
I couldn't believe that a good God would make believing in him hinge on shaky ground, shaky evidence, or incomplete evidence. Or, like many nominal Christians today, since we talked about that earlier, a lot of them kind of like take the position that, look, yeah, there's a lot of contradictory information out there, but, I think this is just most likely to be true. And, like, most likely is good enough for you? Like, that was mind-blowing to me. So, interestingly enough, that's why I started reading the atheist books. I actually don't think the God is Not Great title was cringy at the time, and I understand why people look at it that way. It was, at the time... cringy isn't even the right word. It was intentionally inflammatory.
Fair.
And it worked for its purpose. And at the time, Hitchens was doing debates against men of the cloth. He was actually asked, a lot of people don't know this, he was asked to be, to argue devil's advocate against Mother Teresa's sainthood. And that part is like... That's the level that he was involved with this. He was a journalist going to a lot of these places of the world. You know that from the book, right? Like, religion was something that was a regular part of the world that he was interpreting. And
was he asked by the church to do that?
Yes.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. And they never did it again.
Oh, God.
He made a very good argument. That's the funny part, which they overlooked, of course. But,
yeah,
he at the time, it would be hard to imagine any other title being relevant, because we were also at a time where like faith was kind of peaking in our everyday life. We had a devout evangelical as president in the United States, in the most powerful country on earth, who kind of brought that faith into a lot of the things that he talked about. You could argue that we were maybe involved in a couple of wars at that time, that motivations partly included faith. This wasn't something that was just casual enough. And so I think that it's a result of those things that we look back now and think it's cringy, because we don't need to be so inflammatory. But it was so wildly accepted at the time. People have allowed their faith and their belief to become a lot more personal. Would you agree with that?
Like they don't act on it in public ways. They only act on it like what they keep to them, their inside feelings.
Yeah, faith has sort of slowly become quite a bit restricted. Outside of the extreme evangelical camp, the nominal Christians, the regular Christians like yourself and other people you were describing, I think it more or less just became something more personal to them from secular pressure from the outside, and less something that they were willing to, walk with, through the halls of their high school with the Christian flag holding a Bible. That stuff kind of went away. Yeah.
Yeah. Could I segue into the actual topic to discuss,
Sure.
which would be, is it clear that there is a God? I think you and I can agree that it is clear that Yahweh, the God of the Bible, isn't real.
Right.
And I don't know if we really want to spend our time talking about why it isn't here. I want to talk about, is it clear or not if a God or deity exists?
Yeah.
Do you want to take the first round?
Yeah, so I think we've set up exactly. I thought this for a really long time, and a lot of the arguments for it are pretty clear. Probably the most convincing one, and I think the one that that most people find the most believable, or at least in terms of how they think. They might say something out loud like, "I could never believe that all of this is here by accident." Right? It feels like there's got to be something that set this entire universe and all of life into motion. There's got to be some kind of creator that started this, kicked it all off, right? There's got to be something that catapulted us to this moment. And there's that version of it, and there's also the people who take it from more of a kind of from the position of their egos. They feel like their life would have no purpose if there wasn't at least something bigger than themselves, some kind of creator, and they use that as their reasoning as to why they believe it.
Okay. Do you think it's interesting that people will use that argument to believe in Yahweh? And when I refer to Yahweh, that's like I'm referring to God of the Bible in the way that he refers to himself in the Bible. I say Yahweh to differentiate from just any general God or deity.
I actually don't think that's interesting, because I've met pagans who believe this.
Gotcha. I definitely do believe there are pagans who believe that. I think it's interesting that lots of Christians will say that as their main reason for believing in Christianity. Because they just simply couldn't see themselves believing in Allah. So like they're like, okay, there must be a God. I better go read the Bible. They jump straight to like, oh God, everything's here. Where did it come from? Well, it had to come from a God. Well, better go check out the Bible. Like, wait, there's like a bajillion other gods you could go to for that, but you go to the Bible first because that's all you know, and you don't know why you're jumping there.
Well, I actually think that's why paganism's actually making kind of a comeback and growing.
Yeah. So you go ahead. You tell me why you think it's making a comeback.
I think the reason is because at some point, people are becoming more educated and more thoughtful now. So those people who were casually like, well, I guess Bible's it for me. Because of the culture they're in, they haven't really thought about it that far. If we're honest, most people are not very thoughtful about this part of their lives. They don't go deeper than surface level. They know they want to live a good life. They know they want some meaning and purpose in it. And here's the best source of meaning and purpose and moral wisdom. So here's the Bible. It's right in front of them. But now that they start to question those things, the church has given them a lot of reasons to question those things in the West. And so given that new questioning, now they're kind of trying to look for what's the new thing that I can move to. And they're looking for that new thing that they can move to. And now that we have the internet and things, people have learned that the actual Christian traditions are all pagan, all the holidays, all those kinds of things. And so it's like, maybe that's where the real meaning lies. It's just that.
Do you think that's grift? Do you think the popularity of calling a bunch of Christian traditions pagan in roots is grift for people to like just clickbait articles?
I think it's been exaggerated and grifted upon. I think that we took an academic point, and that's what we do often in all of modern discourse, right? We take something that's more of an academic point, and we take it way the hell out of the academics, and we exaggerate it so that we can take advantage of it. Yep.
Okay. Fair. Yes, you're saying people have been moving to some sort of paganistic beliefs of general deities, rather than because of they understand that, or they see like maybe the Bible isn't the exact answer.
They're looking for spirituality and meaning and purpose, and this one seems generally unoffensive. And I think they also get a little bit of a that like. A lot of times this is people who are younger. There's a little bit of that teenage rebellion in it too, right? Like, this is like a direct repudiation of the faith of my childhood. So that feels kind of good to rebel in that way. I've seen that. I've had that direct conversation with a number of people who identify as pagan.
Would we be able to say, could we replace the word pagan with spiritualism and have the same meaning, or do you directly mean like Norse gods?
Well, that's the funny thing. Because I can't leave well enough alone, and I'm a philosopher who loves this particular topic more than any, I will dive in with them. Like, do you really believe in the specifics of this? And it's clear that they don't. And it's clear that they don't. They mean well. They might think that they nominally believe it. It is more of a vague spiritualism. I just believe that there are powerful, forces at play that guide my life and give me meaning. Because
I think it's a lot more popular for people to move to like a spiritualistic belief that there is something bigger than it is for them to move to like when I think of pagan, dude, I think of like Norse gods like Thor and Odin and like you know what I mean. I think that's the colloquial term for paganism, but I think the intellectual term for paganism might be just anything non-Christian. Am I correct in that?
No. So pagan is a specific set of gods that like. And there are some specific beliefs that you will find pagans have, and they are starting to have their own religious rituals around this. Like the people who are picking this up now, and I agree with you that over the last 20 years, probably a more general spirituality is what people moved to. It's a very recent.
I think pagan is pretty small, and maybe a very inflammatory, like loud minority.
After today's episode, I mean, I can tell you that. Anecdotally, personally in my life, I have met in a number of different circles people identifying as pagan over the last 3 years, and I think it really could have to do with the pandemic.
Could that be the circles that you frequent in?
They're in different circles. I get where you're coming from, but I think you would be surprised. I think if you go look, there are actually news articles about how paganism is making a comeback. This isn't something I'm just like. What is paganism then? Tell me that. Like, what do you define it as?
So
paganism is, that's the problem is how do you define something that is being redefined in real time? Because
but is it like Norse gods or is it not?
It's not Norse gods. So pagan gods is like the Roman gods and like some of those, like it's kind of like all of that mixed. They believe in a pantheon of gods going all the way back from the Romans all the way up through the Norse ones. Like it's kind of a big broad stroke. That's the modern pagan. I don't think that's the original pagan tradition, but that's the that's kind of like the modern thing that's emerging from these new pagans that I've talked to. It's never really clear. And they also they're non-committal. They're not in committal. They're like, well, I don't really believe in any specific one. Like it's more like the general idea. And there's a lot of cloak and dagger. You wouldn't understand my personal faith when you talk to people who are going in this direction.
I see. So it is just spiritualism. It is just I believe in there's something out there. It could be this. It could be that. We're gonna have these fun little rituals that don't really like mean anything.
Right.
Specific.
So the reason why I find it interesting actually has nothing to do with the specifics of pagan belief. I think that at the end of the day, there's one fundamental flaw in logic to stake my flag on the question of the day. Right? Is are there good reasons to believe? Are there good reasons to believe that there is a God? This is a very elaborate and personal emotional version of what's called the God of the Gaps argument. It's I can't explain something. I can't understand something. And wherever that place is that I can't explain or understand something, I'm going to put in a belief that I feel like must be true or works well enough. And so that's what most people are doing when they get onto whether it's paganism or some other vague spirituality. It's I can't explain why everything is here and why I feel like I should have purpose, why I feel like I should have meaning. So there must be something. So I'm going to choose to believe in it. And I think that's a logical flaw. That's a misstep.
Okay. Fair. Do you think it is clear that there is a God? Yes
No.
or no?
Hard no.
Hard no. I actually would put a hard yes.
I know. Here we go.
Okay. I guess I'll take first round because
Yeah.
I brought it up. So you could call this God of the Gaps, but I do believe the logic is sound. The first and foremost axiom of this is something can't come from nothing, because then that truly wouldn't be nothing. Then it had to be something. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So where does something come from? Where does anything come from? Well, it just can't come from nothing. So I think there would have to be some sort of beyond us deity that would create it. I'm not saying he has an interest in what we do. I'm not saying he controls anything past that. So this deity, relative to me, doesn't... I could say he doesn't care about me. I don't know if he cares about me. He doesn't give a name. He doesn't even make it clear who or what he is. But I do think it is clear that something has created something. And I would call that the deity.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, that's about
That's the whole argument.
That is as far as I can go with it.
Okay. So what would be distinguishable from what you just said of calling it like the deity and also calling it the origin of everything?
The only thing I would say is I believe this deity would have to have some supernatural capability beyond our universe and our regular, I guess I'll just call it universe.
Sure.
That it would have to be infinite in a way, because then you could go turtles all the way down. Well, where did that deity come from? You know?
Right.
Well, it has to be outside of that bound of logic. It would have to be. It would have to be outside that. Yes.
Yeah.
Something that I do know is, like, at least within our bounds of logic, is our universe. That something can't just be created from nothing, because that nothing wouldn't actually be nothing at that point.
Sure.
So we do need some sort of supernatural deity that's outside of our bounds of reality to at least start that.
Okay. At that point, I don't think you know what you're talking about, and I don't think anyone else who speaks this way can possibly know what they're talking about. First of all,
Okay,
the
in what ways?
the word supernatural is illusory. It can't mean anything. Because by the moment we could absolute reason about it, know anything about it, think anything about it, the moment we could do that, we'd actually immediately be redefining whatever that thing is as natural. For it to be everything that we are is a product of the natural world. Everything that we think about is a product of the natural world. Our thought chemistry, like all of that, right? So the moment you say supernatural, you've stepped into a realm of something that no longer makes any sense, because you can't conceive of something outside of everything that nature encompasses. Everything we could possibly know, think about, or do. So
I cannot conceive of what its properties are, but I can conceive that there is something that exists beyond our boundaries.
You can conceive of it, but that doesn't mean you're logically consistent in doing so. We can conceive of a lot of things that are logically inconsistent.
Okay.
So, roll with me for a moment longer.
Okay.
So, again, you're saying I can't conceive of what its properties are, but you definitely have given it a property. You've given it the property of being able to create a universe.
Okay, fair. I have, because the universe exists.
Right. So I don't think you can know that, and I don't think you can give it that property without demonstrating it and having a clear line of logic to do so. That's just a move you're willing to make. It's kind of a priori assumption that you're making there.
Okay. I'm not familiar with a priori.
A priori means just like, so we have an a priori assumption that about the concept of two, right? This is one water bottle. This is two. I don't need to have an argument or a logical, like, a logical explanation
assumed, you mean?
As to, yeah, but it's like deeper than an assumption. It's that you have a properly basic understanding of what two means. And you don't have an argument for why two exists. You just know it when you experience it. And so on kind of a level of that, you're kind of making that, a priori, pulling yourself up by your intellectual bootstraps, just saying, well, it has to be this. It must be this. There's got to be a creator.
Okay. And then I will go back to before creator. Let's say before I mention creator. Things exist.
Yes.
So we could argue that things have always existed.
We could argue that.
Okay. I would ask you directly, why do things exist? But I think the only answer we can give is we don't know.
Right.
Okay.
And in contrast, if things always existed versus started to exist, why one or the other? Also, we don't know. Like, we're not capable of understanding the non-existence, because the only thing we're capable of understanding is existence.
I think it's logical to believe that things couldn't always have existed.
Okay. That's a different argument.
Now, it could be just to my own limit of understanding of humanness.
Sure, yeah.
This has got me feeling some type of way, Johnny.
And listen, I made the exact same argument as you. And I made it for years. Until I realized that it like, I just fundamentally intellectually... And the thing is nothing actually changes on this. Everything you think in your life that could possibly change based on this belief, based on having this belief that there must be something rather than nothing.
Nothing can change. Yeah, because I'm simply positing that whatever this being is created it and left it.
Right.
It doesn't mean he has an interest in what I do every day. It doesn't mean he's going to judge me after I die. It doesn't mean anything at all. It doesn't mean he ever gave an opinion on how we conduct our lives. Because things exist, I feel like they must have been created at some point.
Could be.
And whatever made that, I'll call that the deity. And I don't think we can make any assumptions about this deity past that it was created.
Yeah, I also don't think I know that something could have intentionally made it. Like, because in our universe, we know what consciousness is like. But I think the other property that you're smuggling into this logic, and a lot of people are when they make this argument, is they're smuggling consciousness in.
Like the being has a real intention when it does
Yeah.
this.
Well, because again, if it was just if it's just a clump of supernatural matter that accidentally, created our universe while playing a kick drum solo, like with no intelligence to it.
Right.
Yeah, like
even if it did it unintelligently.
Right. Then you're still left holding an empty sack, because there's no difference between that and not believing anything at all.
Functionally, I'd say there's no difference, but intellectually, I think there is a difference.
Where do you think that difference lies? I'm curious.
I mean, are you saying that whether there is a deity that made something, or whether it's always been here and the deity doesn't exist, that there's no difference?
Yeah, I think from an intellectually, I don't think there's any difference. Have you ever heard of the Russell's teapot argument?
Yeah, there could be like a teapot on Mars, like floating around it right now.
Right.
But explain it for me
So Russell's teapot is basically, there could be a teapot that's been, jettisoned out into space and, got caught in the gravity well of a distant planet and is going around there. Now, I know that teapot is there, right? I know it's there. Nothing about the universe changes because of that. Nothing because of, it doesn't have any impact on anyone's life. I don't have any evidence, right? Like, I can't prove the teapot's there. We can't see it. We can't interpret it. And so the question is, what's the difference between that and no teapot at all?
Yeah. Functionally, there's no difference whether the teapot isn't there, and that's all I mean. That's like, I think we can posit that this deity exists, but functionally, there's nothing that I can derive from that. I can't derive that there's a meaning to life from that. I can't derive that I should live my life this way or that way. Other than the fact that the teapot exists or not, that's it. So it doesn't extend anything past the teapot.
So here's why intellectually I think that's invalid.
Okay.
Because I think I could make the same case that it's obviously not a deity. It's an infinitely expanding, collapsing multiverse full of failed and possible universes that are bouncing around doing that. And it's like that
doesn't work. No, because that's just a turtles all the way down.
How do you figure?
That's just because that's just another layer of saying, well, it's not the deity. What created us was another multiverse that bumped into us and bloated us into existence. Well, then that's just another turtle down where you're just like, okay, well, what created the multiverses? You get what I mean?
Yeah, because you're looking for a first mover. That's what that's called.
Correct.
A first mover.
Yep.
You're looking for a first mover. And I think to do that, you'd have to find the first move first.
The first move?
Yeah. Yeah, because
we can posit that there was a first move, because whether we are on the 9th, 100th, or nth move right now, we can posit that there was a move before us, and then we can posit all the way back to there was a n minus 9, 10, 20 moves.
Here's why we can't.
A first move.
Because that argument smuggles in time as a concept.
Time?
Mm-hmm. So time is something we experience as part of the natural world, but it's actually not real. Like, time is an illusory concept. There actually is no such thing as time.
I will follow you there. Okay.
Yeah, like time is just something that it's how we measure changes in states of our physical universe. It's part of the natural world. And so any being that would have existed outside of our universe, right? This is the famous argument, it has to be timeless and spaceless. Well, our universe could also be timeless. We don't even know. Time could just be our first-person conscious experience of phenomenon that we're not wired to understand, because we're only able to understand our conscious experience of things. And so I'm not even sure. We'd have to prove that there was a first time. That
Do you
time
think
started.
the argument, I think, therefore I am, holds up?
Yeah, I think that one does. Absolutely, of course.
So we can posit that we exist in terms of the consciousness that exists in us.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything else around me could be an illusion.
Okay, so let's take that then. Let's forget the universe. Us, the consciousness. We exist.
Yeah.
I'd argue that it would have to come from somewhere. It can't come from nothing, because then that nothing wouldn't truly be nothing.
Sure.
So whatever brought my consciousness into existence, I would argue be
I absolutely
deity.
agree that there's something else that would have had to be out there to like something beyond my conscious experience must exist, right? It wouldn't make any sense for my consciousness by itself to just be, and there to be nothing else. And I think we have very
Fair.
good reasons to believe that. But that doesn't.
So would you
but that
call
doesn't
that
mean
the
I think
deity?
no, because I don't know what that means, and I don't think you
I
know what
would
it
call
means
that
either.
the deity.
I don't think you
Are
know
you
what
saying,
it means either.
Are you saying that outside of your consciousness, that it created your consciousness?
No, I'm not saying that.
No.
I'm simply
Okay.
saying something else like something else outside of my consciousness must exist, right? So the second assumption I can make after, okay, I'm conscious, I'm thinking, the lights are on. So there is something that it's like to be me. Therefore, I do exist. My conscious experience exists. The next thing I can say is something beyond my consciousness must also exist. But I can't know, I don't know anything
Why?
else.
Why do you say that?
Why do I say that?
Yeah.
Well, because I have very good reasons to think that I haven't always been conscious.
Okay. Why?
For starters, at times my consciousness becomes very dim when I go to sleep at night or during a medical procedure. At times, the lights seem to go all the way out and then come back on for reasons that are mostly mysterious to me.
Okay. Do you believe that that happened before you were born in some way?
Not for the purpose of the reasoning that we're going down here. I believe that for separate, more examinations of the physical universe, because we have good reasons to think consciousness is clearly tied to our brain matter.
Okay. I'm okay with believing that consciousness is purely a construct of our organs.
Sure.
Even though it seems very mysterious and very real to me. I also have a certain faith in things that I don't understand about our brain functioning, that it could create a very real experience for me.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
Like, I believe that there's a possibility that something can create something so real to me that it fools me every day.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But that doesn't get it away from the substrate of the brain. Again, we have really good reasons. We have really good reasons to believe that consciousness is a product of brain matter.
Fair. And I will, yeah, I concede there. I believe that's true too.
Yeah.
So that takes us back another turtle down. Where's brain matter come from? Where's matter in general come from?
But yeah, eventually I can't, like, when we say come from, that smuggles in time. And so it actually leaves the question of, well, where does time come from?
Okay, we can start with time then. What do you think then?
I'm not sure time exists. I don't think I've ever discovered, and I don't think anybody else who's smart has ever discovered, way smarter than me, I don't think we've ever discovered the origin of time. We sort of have a theory that at the moment of the hot Big Bang, that's when time and space became what it is, right? But that's our best working model right now. And it's convenient, right? It's convenient that happens to make sense to us, because anything else we could possibly conceive of, we couldn't conceive of. You really can't imagine the universe before time.
You know, are you pointing to the fact that, let's say a person travels around a black hole interstellar style, they don't age as fast as the people outside the black hole does?
I mean, that is one piece of a myriad of evidence to suggest that time is very mysterious and maybe
Fair.
non-existent. But there's a ton of evidence to this fact.
And we could posit that as someone gets closer and closer to the center of this black hole, that time for them slows down to it, logarithmically, to an infinitesimal point.
Right.
But the people outside of it, it's going at our normal rate, quote unquote.
Yeah, that's the basic general relativity. Yep. So
Very interesting.
So here's the problem with that. Obviously, no one can ever do it. because, putting a human to those speeds, like, we're not even sure exactly what would happen if we accelerated matter past those speeds. Like, we don't know. That's something we haven't figured out in science. It would answer a lot of questions for us if we could figure it out. But we don't know. It could be that is where matter ceases to be matter.
Could.
Don't know. Again, if it's guesses, it is guesses all the way down, not just turtles. Like, at some point, you're making it up. And that's my point about the first mover argument. At some point, you have to be intellectually honest with yourself and realize that you're making it up. You want to believe it. It would make things seem more
God damn it, Johnny. It would be convenient. Fuck.
It would make things seem to be more, structurally sound, right? But you can't know that because you are so far away from all the things you would have to know to be able to know that it was created. Because again,
can you pick this apart for me in a shorter paragraph?
Suggesting
I believe that
go ahead.
A deity exists. I believe that a deity exists simply because things exist, and I feel like something had to have created those things because those things can't just come from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, I posit that something must exist that created them, and I know zero properties about this being past the fact that it made existence
the direct
of our natural world.
Right. So the direct counter argument to that is
okay.
Going back in my brain here. So the direct counter argument to that is, by created, you mean began to exist.
Our world.
Right. Matter. Like our universe.
Yeah, our world isn't matter. Our universe.
Yeah, our universe began to exist. You're smuggling in that by saying created because you actually don't know if our universe began to exist versus it always existed. You do that based on this question, I don't know how something could come from nothing. But that's based on a mere human understanding of something and nothing, which is restricted to our experience of time and space in a fourth dimensional universe where we experience time, decay, motion, all of those things. Like, all of that comes from our mere human understanding of things that are clearly way beyond our human conscious experience.
Would it be fair to say that my argument falls apart if we concluded the other possibility that things have always existed?
No, I actually don't think you could even say that. I think that that's illusory too. Because, again, the idea that things either began to exist or always existed, those two things philosophically, to me, you don't know what you're talking about.
Interesting.
The only thing that you can interface with is things do exist. I can't know what it's like for things to not exist. So philosophically, I'm going to have to restrict my philosophical thinking into everything. The only thing that's worth doing any kind of philosophical thinking about is a world where things do exist. I don't know if they began to exist. I don't know if there's such a thing as things existing without the concept of time. I don't think if there's such a thing as nothing existing. I have no idea. I only can deal with the world where things do exist, because that's the world I find myself in. So anything else, any pontificating or philosophizing about anything else is just wasted energy.
Interesting. I had a good way to, what's it called? To summarize that, and I just lost it. You'll have to come back to me.
All right. We've come to it.
Would you say that it is not able to be posited that things must come into existence?
Correct. Because by saying comes into existence, right, you're imagining you're smuggling in the concept of a universe where things don't exist. At one point, no existence, and then another point, existence. But you can't know that. That's the thing you can't know, because you can only know existence.
And you're saying there's no way for us to posit that things have some point not existed.
Correct. Our brains are too small, too smooth, and too restricted to the universe of existence. We only know a universe of existence.
That's a solid point. So this hinges on two things. We can't ever conceive of a universe we can't ever conceive of something not existing.
Right.
There's no reason to point that has ever happened.
Because what would that mean? You wouldn't. You can't explain what that would mean.
Right, and therefore, we can't posit that at some point things had to come into existence.
Right.
Okay.
The only reason why we think we can is hubris, right? It's because that's sort of how we experience things. We experience the non-existence of things, right? We can think of not Royal. And then one day I met Royal, and now I can think of a Royal. And it could be that there's no such thing as not Royal. Maybe Royal always was. That's how I experience it because of the material universe around me.
Where does that leave the argument of things have always existed?
Same problem.
How? My brain is very smooth right now. I need help.
Yeah, same problem. So the thing is again, to make the point that things have always existed, I have to posit the counter argument that there's such a thing as non-existence. Because the exact thing that I am talking about is a comparing and a contrasting, right? So if I say, well, things have always existed, that suggests that there is a possible alternative to that called non-existence.
Does it, though?
Sure. Well, otherwise, what would be the point of the sentence? It would just be nonsense. By saying things have always existed, right?
We can agree that we exist right now, right?
Yep.
Can I buy your same logic saying, well, because we're saying I exist right now, that must be in contrast to that something not existing?
No. How do you figure
that? I feel like you're saying, okay, if I say things always exist, you're only saying that because you're contrasting it to the possibility things may not exist, or there's some point where things didn't exist. Well, I would counter with saying, if you say the only thing that is sure that is right now exists, or we exist, then I'd say by the same logic, you only argue that because it's contrasting to we couldn't exist.
So I do have good reasons to believe that you cannot exist, because I actually know what the non-existence of another conscious being is like. I can experience that firsthand myself. Again, under the right anesthetics, my consciousness can go so dim that there's nothing left that it's like to be me. I have no conscious experience. I'm not even dreaming, right? Like I'm so asleep that there is nothing until the lights just come back on. And I can experience that nothingness. I can also recognize what it's like when the consciousness of someone else no longer exists. I can also know what it was like before this consciousness of a child was there. And now there's a child that seems to be conscious and can, make noises at me, mostly crying at first. And so there is such a thing as non-existence of consciousness within the confines of our natural world. But you're suggesting everything not existing. That I cannot do. That I cannot do. Because I only live in a world where everything exists. I can't know what it's like for everything not to exist.
Can we posit that everything has always existed? If not, why not?
Okay, again, no. We can't posit that everything always existed, because that would suggest that I would have to know something about everything not existing. I would have to be able to make a logical and consistent point as to what that means definitionally, and I can't.
How do we? Okay,
that's a false move. I can't posit something that I couldn't possibly experience or know something from.
How do we come to the belief that everything exists right now.
Well, there are people who are questioning that, but that's a side point.
How does that? Okay, I should rephrase it like this: how does us believing everything exists right now not use that same argument of I'd have to compare it to everything not existing?
It's because we're not actually. This is one of those problems of language. It's not actually that we're positing that everything does exist. It's not exactly what we're doing. What we're more like doing is saying, I'm experiencing everything.
Okay.
Like, so I can posit that I experience everything because I am, in fact, experiencing everything. It's like the first a priori assumption we make about our years. It is kind of just a retooled version of I think, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, that can't be an illusion. All the facts and information and experiences within it could be illusions. Right?
Okay.
But the fact that it's all there can't be an illusion.
Fair. Interesting. Okay, I think we could close with that.
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything else to add?
I mean, I think that's the two sides of the argument. I think it's worth noting that.
Oh my gosh, it's not. This is just part one.
Dude.
This is just part one. So I guess I will close part one and try to summarize in a 20-second bit what I think you mean, because I think I agree with you now.
Yeah.
So it is not clear that there is a God. From, if you're going to say the reasoning for thinking a God exists is things exist, so therefore something must have created things because something can't come from nothing. You are saying that in order for us to posit that something came from something, this is hard. This is like intellectual soup, and this is the deep end.
Yeah, it is. First episode, baby. Right into the deepest of deep waters.
Damn.
This is what they come for. I will point out that my argument on this is somewhat new and novel.
I want to spit this back out to you in a way that I understand too, but it's hard.
Yeah. Language gets
really
really tried here. Language gets really tried here. And I think that's ultimately where we get tripped up all on is it's very hard to get to a line to a point where we're playing the exact same language game.
Can you imagine how hard this would be to explain to someone in like caveman language like a billion years ago?
Yeah, we couldn't have. It's that simple. We couldn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I want to put this in like a little sound bite. Jeez. We can't. Fuck. This is using all my brain power. Like my RAM is maxed out to like complete RAM usage. You good, Johnny?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I can do the same thing. I guess the one sentence version of the argument, version of the argument is when people say something can't come from nothing, they're positing a concept of not something. It's not quite nothing. It's not something. And the only thing they can possibly know is something. Because the only thing that has ever been in anyone's conscious experience is something. And there isn't anyone who has ever experienced whatever this other thing is that they're making up. And so when you say something can't come from nothing, you can't know anything other than something. That's the only thing you can know because that's the only thing anyone can ever know. It's the only experience we have is we do experience something.
Okay. I want that to be easier to understand.
I know. And that's one of the things.
I want it to be easier to be communicated. We just need to find a way to communicate this idea. Simpler.
It's one of the hardest, and this is one of the hardest ones to really come up with. I think it's why people struggle with it the most. Is because it really is it is the limit of our understanding. right? Like, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about where is the limit of our understanding. And I'm suggesting that the limit is everything has to be something. That's it. The limit is everything must be something. There is no such thing as not things. Anyone, at least not to me. And like, if somebody has experienced that,
there is no such thing as not things, but if it is true, there's no way that we can even posit that exists.
Yeah, we wouldn't.
There's no argument we can make that has ever existed or has happened.
You can't get there from here. You can't get to not a universe of nothing from a universe of something.
It may, but we can't ever. We can't even make an argument that it has.
We're not the ones because we're part of the something universe.
Okay. Would you say it may be, but there's no way we could ever argue that it has been?
I don't know whatever it is. Maybe. I mean, because
God, we're getting in the soup here, dude.
because I don't even know what that means, and I don't think you know what it means either.
Ugh. No, I don't.
This is and by the way, I actually think we can give ourselves a break, because even if we could come up with something that it means, it doesn't mean anything.
I will. Can we give ourselves a restroom break?
Yeah.
I think there's another topic we have to discuss here.
What's that?
If it is not clear that there is a God, what is the meaning of life?
Oh, that's a perfect second episode.
Dude, are you down? I have like 45 minutes or an hour.
Yeah, I think that one's probably a shorter topic anyway. Yeah, we can get into that.
Okay, cool. Let me ask. I'm gonna text the guy. I was gonna call him.
Are you? Is this you're asking for a friend because I just like made you question that, or?
No. It's a guy for a job.
No. I mean, like, the meaning of life. It's like, I gotta get an episode 2 because now I don't know what to do after Johnny made this.
Oh God, I got a segue. Dude, Johnny just changed my opinion that it isn't clear that there is a God. I was very solid on that.
Yeah.
And that is now unsolid.
Yeah.
And maybe even blown away. There's my final Jenga piece I was holding on to.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go shoot myself after this podcast.
No, you're not.
No. Okay. Anyway, second, what is the meaning of life? I think there is a meaning to life, and it may not fit people's definition of meaning, but I think there is a.
Hold up.
Boy.
Take it from the top.
I held my breath. So, intro to part 2. If it is not clear that there is a God, which I think you have changed my opinion that it is not clear that there is some sort of deity that has created everything, then what is this is a grift of an argument. Then what is the meaning of life? As if these two have anything intellectually to do with each other.
Yeah.
But I feel like in people's minds they pair these two together. But I'm going to, for the sake of it, while acknowledging obvious grift, number 4, that these two have nothing to do with each other. People say, well, if God isn't real, then what's the meaning of life? Well, these are two completely separate topics that people pair together for no solid reason why.
Maybe no solid reason, but I do think there's a reason. And so, because I think what they're saying is, my reason for life was God.
Well, yeah, Yahweh, Christian, God of the Bible.
Yeah.
Your
even
purpose
some
of life
spiritual
is
people.
to...
Even some generic spiritual people, I think feel this way.
Oh, I'm not arguing that they do or don't feel. I know they feel that way, but they feel that way for not intellectual reasons.
Agreed.
I do think there is a purpose to life, though, that we can all agree on, and that is to increase pleasure and decrease suffering. Because the only thing I think, therefore I am, something past that I can also posit exist is my pain and my pleasure. There is no argument philosophical or not, that the pain I experience is not bad. It hurts. I can't get away from that. I can be away from it momentarily if I'm under anesthesia, but I still feel it, and that's not good. I think the purpose is to decrease pain and increase pleasure. That's the only thing I can grip from it. What do you think?
Yeah. So this is probably, I'm going to guess you never read The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris.
No, I have not.
So exactly, it's so funny because this is the very next place that you went, and it was the very next thing when like I lost my faith. I did this over a longer period of time. I was also trying to like raise kids and had a lot of other things going on in my life at the time, right? But it was like, I feel like I have real reasons to care about what happens. Real reasons, not just like, it matters what we do, and I don't feel like I have a good argument or a good reason. At least I didn't know a way or a language game I could play to make that clear, because I used to do all of that within the confines of my God belief. Like, if a God exists, this is how we would want us to be. Right?
Yeah.
Like, that was my argument for it. So now, when I feel like someone is wrong to murder someone, and not just like wrong subjectively, right? Really wrong. Why do I feel that way? Why? Because that's bigger than what you're talking about. It's not just about my personal pain and pleasure. It's more like the greater purpose, the greater pain and pleasure of all conscious beings. That's how I felt.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that any sort of moral, some people might attest to this or not, but any sort of morality that we have is ultimately grounded in increasing pleasure and decreasing pain.
Yep. So Sam Harris's language of the moral landscape that he uses to describe this is he suggests it's well-being versus suffering, right? Same kind of language.
Yeah, well-being.
Yeah, well-being.
Yeah, that's probably a much more palatable word to use.
Yeah.
Because I think pleasure has a bad connotation.
Yep.
Here. But well-being.
Yeah, just the experience of being well, everything going better. And some people have actually made the argument that you can't do this philosophically. There's the famous David Hume argument that you can't derive an ought from an is. So it's, you can't say, and nothing about the way the world is can tell you the way it ought to be. So you can't, basically he said this actually kind of in passing. It was never meant to be taken as like philosophical truth for all time, but people do take it as philosophical truth and suggest that, you know, there's no state of the universe of facts about the world that tells me how the world should be. Anything in that domain is just my personal preference being borne out or something like that. Now, what Sam Harris's argument is that if anything is bad and worth avoiding, that we all could universally agree on, it's the worst possible suffering for everyone. Like, if anything's bad, that's bad. If the word bad is to mean anything, that's it. And so any state of the universe that gets us away from that is a move in a good, you might say, direction. And that's what we're doing.
Agreed.
And you might be able to pick apart Sam Harris's argument with strict moral philosophy and stick your moral philosopher meta-ethics pole in the ground and be like, well, you can't really make that argument. It's logically inconsistent. Maybe you can do that. But what I think Sam Harris did is describe not necessarily what we can argue for perfectly philosophically. What he perfectly described is what we are, in fact, doing every single day. And I think I'm pretty close to you in what I think the meaning of life is. Because I kind of agree. I think that what drives us, when you really get down to it, of why we get out of bed in the morning, it's because we feel like some part of our conscious experience has the possibility to make the world a better place. Well, what do we mean by better? We mean better in terms of getting away from the worst possible suffering of everyone.
Yeah, to decrease my suffering and increase my well-being.
Yeah, and partly to do that, also those around you.
I would also agree. I'm sorry. I would push back on that. I don't think altruism exists.
This has nothing to do with altruism.
Other people. Well, I would say people could say, well, yeah, you're well-being yourself, but you're also doing it to help other people. I'm like, yes, but you're only helping other people because it in turn makes you feel good in your head to help them, which is which has to be counted as a well-being increase to yourself.
I don't think it's quite
you
that.
don't
I do disagree
help
with you on that.
people. Really?
Yeah. I think we
Okay,
have.
where?
I think we actually have selfish, non-altruistic reasons to want to make sacrifices for other people. Because
I think that's what I'm saying.
well, but it's not. It's not because it makes you feel good. It has nothing to do with the
Okay.
direct experience. It actually doesn't feel good. Try it. Sacrifice for somebody else. It feels like shit half the time. And so the problem is,
I don't think it's a net shit though. It's not like a net negative. It's a net positive for you.
So let me make the language more broad in a way that I think really captures it for me. I think what it is
Okay.
is that we wouldn't want to live in a world. It would be ultimately net shittier to live in a world where no one ever did that. Like, and so
Yes.
and so selfishly, because I don't want to live in that world, I have to do things that pushes me towards the world where not everyone does that, and that includes me making a sacrifice for other, even if it doesn't feel great.
Agreed. So let me ask you this in the other way. You see your daughter has a broken arm, and you can either not spend $5,000 to take her to the hospital and fix that, and that would hurt you personally, financially, to do that. However, the reason you do it is because knowing that that is happening to her without helping her would be more suffering to you than just forking over the $5,000.
Yeah, but that's
So
that's actually
it
just
is
a
a
case where I get to suffer less.
Right. You are it's a selfish. You're helping her. You could even think of it not even as your own daughter, a stranger. You know what I mean, or whatever. You only go and help them because you have decided to suffer less by knowing that this person is helped than it would be to just fork over the $5,000.
Yeah, I do think there are other cases. I think there are other cases where
And we decide that every day. Every time you pass by a homeless person, you say, I'm not going to give them the $10 or $5 or whatever. You have decided it is more suffering for you to fork over the $10 than it is for you to go on your day knowing that he is suffering or she is suffering on the road. Mm-hmm. That's the other extreme end of it.
Sure. But I actually think there are cases where we experience more suffering to do the quote unquote better thing to do. The better thing in terms of getting us closer to.
Can you give an example?
That's what I'm trying to come up with one that really captures it. Because
I don't think that's possible. I think when we dissect that, it will come out to be a net positive for the person doing it.
my personal direct experience.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Your personal direct experience, because the mental state you're in has to be factored into that experience as well.
Sure.
Knowing that you went and did something good is a benefit to you that people will die for, and because they prefer knowing that they did something good and then burning on the stake, literally or non-literally for it, than they would not doing it. They would suffer more, and they have decided they would suffer more by not doing that. They would rather burn on the stake because that's their best, you get what I mean?
Yeah, I think we're confusing the term of suffering there a bit. Because
net positive is what we have to look at things as.
Yeah, but we don't actually morally reason always in the terms of net positive, do we? I mean, there's a lot of times where we make a call that we're not sitting here doing a moral calculation and figuring out, well, if I did that
Consciously, no.
No.
Consciously, no. But subconsciously, always.
Okay. But I can't know what my subconscious is doing.
It does things for us.
Yep.
It does things for us.
And so when we talk about morality, like our subconscious just really And I actually think when we talk about how we experience the meaning of life, I think that our subconscious and its inner workings aren't really a part of the equation here. What we're really trying to do is, with our conscious experience, come up with a way to understand our own behaviors. Because sometimes there's things we think of that are self-destructive, or some people might look at as why did this person, do this thing that seems self-destructive? And in the end, it's because we think we're doing it for the right reasons. And we think we're doing it for a good cause. And it's not because... The person
did it self-destructively because it to them it was a net less suffering.
So you're including that feeling of, if I don't do this, I will feel bad about not doing it, as part of the motivation for not doing it.
100%.
And here's the problem is, I actually think our motivations are much more happening in the subconscious in ways that we don't really understand them. Because I'm not sure I know that. And maybe. You might be right. I just don't care.
I'm not saying you might not care consciously, but subconsciously. We have to take into the conscious and subconscious motives into this, because our brain is those two. And it has weighed it out and mathed it out whether it's better or not for us to do this. It will not. The brain will not do something that it believes is a net negative in every way after factoring in everything. It won't.
Agreed.
It can't. The only way, I guess, it could.
But that's not a part of moral reasoning. You
could even argue an insane person would, but it's not true.
But that's not a part of moral reasoning. And so, to come back to your original question of the meaning of life, I don't think we can take conscious credit for our subconscious's moral reasoning. That might be true. That might be the moral calculation that our subconscious is doing and coming up with good reasons for, and ultimately, like, that is why we do or do not anything, right?
I should say the only reason to do or do not anything in life, the only reason anything is worth doing is to decrease suffering and increase well-being.
Yes.
That's the only reason to do anything.
Yes, and that is ultimately what our biology will wire us to try and do. We will get it wrong sometimes. Yeah. Obviously, within that admits we could be wrong. We could get the calculation wrong, right?
Yes, it can be wrong, but it never intends to be wrong.
Right. Its intent is always towards that factor. No doubt,
yes.
No disagreement. It's the reason why we all get out of bed in the morning. But it's not how that's not the experience of day-to-day life that brings us meaning. Because that's still kind of a no free will scenario where our subconscious is just driving the truck and we don't get to be a part of that. It's our conscious connection to it's the moral calculations and the thinking that we do that actually brings us meaning. It's that time where we might not actually, the decision made, okay, here's a way to put it. You're trying to decide if you should tell your friend that you think that he's in an abusive relationship. It's a hard decision to make. Is it right? We have this whole moral dilemma. Is that even my place to say anything? We go through all those moral calculations. And at the end, what feels good is that we came to a conclusion that felt good. But the actual reasons are illusory to us. Our subconscious made the call. And we don't get to know or be a part of that. We don't really know what our motivations are. We just tell ourselves really good stories in our neocortex about why we did it after the fact. It's more like all of our reasoning about these kinds of things are post hoc. But it's actually, that's where we get the meaning from, is that post hoc reasoning. If you ask somebody, what do you feel good about you did in this last week? You know what? I was having a really hard time. I was debating with myself of whether or not I wanted to, kind of go out on a limb and tell my friend about a situation he's in that's just not good for him. And I did it, and I feel really good about it. It's not we feel good because our subconscious did it. We feel good because we did the thinking and the calculation, and we felt like we were a part of that process. Does that make sense?
Almost.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I'm trying to follow the logic.
For a minute, understand that this is one of those cases where the subjective experience doesn't track reality. Because the reality is, in my view, there's no free will. Our subconscious is going to make the best bet that it can. It might get wrong, but it intends to make the best bet. And so there's really there's almost no good or bad in that scenario, because we just kind of move away from suffering and towards the good. Anyway, through a series of subconscious motivations and processes, we're trying to do that. The part where we get to participate in a way where we actually feel good and derive meaning from it is the part where we think about it.
So I think where we're saying the meaning of life or the purpose of life is to increase well-being, decrease suffering, is the moment where the teapot is in space versus where the moment the teapot can hit our head. Okay. And here's what I mean: is debating anything beyond or below the purpose of life being to increase well-being and decrease suffering. Anything below that, the teapot is out of our orbit. Okay.
Right.
Anything above this, the teapot can hit our head, and now it is a part of our life, and it matters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Below that, the teapot does not matter in our life. So when people say they look at, I call this my baseline of like purpose of life. It starts here, and anything past that, we can like debate about. But anything, people are just like, well, if that's your purpose of life, then that's meaningless. I'm like, it's not meaningless. Remember, everything above this line, it can hit your head and it can really fucking hurt. Okay? You're going to call that meaningless? No, we should avoid that. And we should do things, and we have a reason for doing things to avoid that. Okay? But below this, you could say, well, are our brains like being an illusion to us, and then is it really a big thing about should we increase well-being and decrease suffering? Well, maybe, but that doesn't matter to me. All that matters to me is that I feel it. This is the baseline. We need to worry about things above this, and everything below this does not change this baseline.
Yeah, so and I think where someone would kind of argue with you, and now I need to probably issue a trigger warning, because I'm about to talk about a very serious topic here.
I'm going to do a number 9 possible TOS violation.
Yeah, there you go. I think that if anybody ever watches this and this next part is like really suffering or struggling for you.
You might have to say, if you're going to refer to assault to people, I think a lot of people use the term SA on these instead of like the R word.
No, I'm not. I'm actually going to talk about the experience of wanting to commit suicide. And so if that is something that you're going through and you watch this, understand that this is about philosophy, and we're trying to understand and make sense of someone else's behavior that neither Royal or I have done, which is why we're here. And so if that is something you're going through, we're not professional help. Go get professional help. All of those things aside, I think the moral calculation that someone is doing is exactly what you just described. And what the framework that you put it into is why it's actually perfectly understandable that somebody does end up getting to the point where they take their own life, right? Because sure, they are at bottom trying to do that hard work. The meaning of life for them is to avoid suffering. And so at some point you can get yourself into a position.
Have a net positive.
Yeah, where that seems like a net positive. They might be right or wrong. But that is the thing that we think on the outside when someone does decide to take their own life. That's the tragedy. We think the tragedy is that they were able to reason themselves to the point where that was the choice.
We think they're wrong.
And we think they're wrong. We think that if only we could have made a better argument. If only we could have shown them something.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. I think we're dead on. I think we're in agreement on this.
I agree. I do think there's objectively situations where it is a, and I'm gonna have to do terms of service all over this, and I should put like a trigger warning thing. I'm just gonna put TOS in here for now. But I definitely think there is a point where you can make a great argument that it's a net negative for you from here on out.
Yeah.
And
ALS.
The axiom of this would be you're on fire and you have a gun in your hand. Do you shoot yourself or not? Oh yeah, you definitely do.
Yeah.
There's no going back from that.
More likely if it's an oil fire.
And oh god, okay. Yeah, you've been dipped in oil and then let a flame.
There's no way out.
Yeah. So net positive is to shoot yourself at that point.
Yep.
Now that is not relatable to nearly anyone in his history other than a small unlucky group of people.
Here's a real life example that does happen to people.
Okay, fair.
The final stages of Lou Gehrig's disease.
100%.
I have watched somebody not be able to even move their arms to hold their own child anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I could never, in my hubris, tell that person, oh, it's definitely worth it to keep hanging on now. Like, there's no way. I couldn't look them in the face and do it, and our laws are not well adjusted to that. Which is, I mean, that is one of the quintessential examples that gets used in the argument for this.
Do you find it interesting that people will very hardly push back on that?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Very excruciatingly push hard back on that.
Yeah, I do find it interesting. In general, it's usually because they haven't done any of the previous, hour and a half you and I have discussed on this. They haven't done the hard work of actually thinking about where these things come from. They haven't thought about meta ethics and like real philosophy. And so on paper, life is just good, right? They're not thinking about it that hard. And good for them. On some level, good for them, because they've never had to go through that level of suffering. Otherwise, they would have had to think about it. You would have had no choice but to think about it. So I think on some level, good for you for experiencing that level of privilege, but that definitely comes from a position of privilege.
I would say that is definitely privilege. And you know me, I'm not exactly the person who would flagship that word, but
right.
That is, we have to recognize that there is such thing as privilege.
And if it exists anywhere, it definitely exists there, right?
Yeah. And I'm jealous. I'd have that privilege if I could have it, and if I had it, I wouldn't want to like let it go.
Yeah. And that's why we have to make good arguments. Again, in the spirit of the pursuit of meaning of life, it's why we have to have good arguments and good people in the public sphere to be able to make the case that, hey, this is one of those cases where you do need to check your privilege and recognize that you would not want the law to dictate someone else's choice based on your privileged view of it. That's not good for society as a whole, and that moves us away from the good life, away from that better well-being for everyone.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool.
And that's what's actually cool about, if we could agree on this, imagine, if we could all agree on this exact conception of the meaning of life, the purpose for life, morality, if we could all agree this is really why we get out of bed in the morning, and ultimately people do. If you spend enough time, if they're willing to talk to you long enough, you won't find anybody that disagrees that this is ultimately the reason they got out of bed in the morning, right? Like,
you'll only find people who refuse to make a better argument and then will shut down.
Yes. Yeah. Because it's obvious that that's why they do. It's obvious that that's why they do anything that they think is worth doing. And so if we could get to the point where we could actually talk about it and all agree about it, man, we would make a lot more progress very quickly.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
So ultimately, the meaning of life, obviously, what we really meant here was sex, drugs, rock and roll. And,
amen.
Yeah.
Amen. The moment I can hook myself up into the chair that gives me an injection of heroin in my left arm, an injection of another anesthetic in my right arm, puts VR Wonderland in front of my face, we've made it.
Pure hedonistic pleasure, clearly, is the only thing that matters. I think that's what we said, right?
Upload me into that universe from a conscious upload in the back of my head, Matrix style.
So without being facetious, you're familiar with the pleasure machine thought experiment, right?
Maybe. What is the...
Basically, it's the thought experiment of if the rest of your life you'd never experienced not being hooked up to the pleasure machine.
Infinite pleasure, infinite well-being.
Yeah, if you could hook yourself up to it, would you? And I think I know your answer, but I want you to well, on record.
Dude, where's my yes button?
Yeah.
Where's my yes button? Slam that. Slam it down.
Yeah, I think anybody who says no is wildly intellectually dishonest.
100%. I was going to say the same exact word.
Yeah, like there's no way that's true. Like you never get
They're only saying it because they know unchecked hedonism in this world creates suffering.
Right.
But they don't know that.
Right, the point is once you're plugged in, that's not part of the calculation anymore.
Yeah. It's gone. It's over.
You don't have to worry about that. Yep. Or they're bringing in some kind of external external factor like, well, no one could do that forever, so eventually the machines are going to have to get unplugged, and that would mean like I actually could never. No. Stay within the thought experiment. You'll never get unplugged.
Dude, what do you think about people's unwillingness to agree with? Would you call that an axiom?
Well,
agree with basic points. What do you think of that? Why do people? They won't let that happen.
I'll tell you
They'll
why.
Never.
It's because they didn't. It's because they didn't have the first hour and a half of this discussion. So ultimately,
not just on this point.
No,
I mean on any point.
No, well, but so you could apply this to any other point. Ultimately,
okay.
This is a perfect way to wrap this up because I think it gets to the heart of what the purpose of the show is and why we're going to keep doing these conversations. Right. At the end of the day, everyone thinks our disagreements are political. They're not. Everyone thinks our disagreements are personal disputes. They're not. Really. The real differences between people is our lack of philosophical agreement on first principles. And if you look at that, like that's driving virtually every disagreement between people. One of them could be whether or not there's a God, right? Because the moment you start to believe, like, someone who does believe that the universe was created and there must be some kind of, greater purpose. Now, granted, we were stopping at an earlier point than what most people do. You were way further ahead than what most people are. Most people think that there is a personal God when they do think this way, right? And they think there's something involved. And so because they think that immediately makes certain other things that must be true. And now they think it important to organize their life around it. Just like this one. The moment you think it must be true that, I don't want to